Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about this situation that is brewing in the city of Chicago, because as you guys may or may not know, the Democratic National Convention, where they are to nominate Joe Biden officially, is to take place there this year in August. And right now, the National Democratic Party, in conjunction with Brandon Johnson in the city of Chicago, are working tirelessly to effectively ban protests. Now, to be clear, the city of Chicago is saying that they're definitely allowing protests. They're definitely trying to make it happen, but I'm going to show you with facts and evidence how that is definitely not the case, how they are in fact trying to ban protests. And the way that they're trying to do this is by designating a free speech zone so far away from the DNC that nobody who is attending the conference would even know these protesters exist. Now, we're going to get into this. We're going to cover this hypocrisy. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who signed up over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
And remind you that this show is available in podcasting form.
If recent pro-Palestinian demonstrations are any indication of what could happen in August when the Democratic National Convention comes to Chicago, it could help explain the reasoning for restrictions the city has placed on where protesters can assemble. A coalition of groups fighting that have now filed for a preliminary injunction asking a federal judge to grant them better access.
So right off the top, you hear from this local news segment that they are suing the city of Chicago, and they're asking for a federal judge to allow them better access to the convention so that they can actually be seen and heard during the course of the protest. Now, of course, you have the federal government, the Secret Service, Homeland Security, and in this particular case, the Transportation Department, teaming up to say that that's actually a very big security risk and we have to protect the president, and all these other different various justifications that honestly are all too familiar in the city of Chicago and have been shot down by federal judges in previous years because they are meant to be a distraction in order to force these protesters out. Now, we're going to hear from one of the organizers of this particular group that happens to be a party to this particular lawsuit, so you could understand the case that this individual is making. And I will say, even though this guy is a left-wing progressive and definitely looks the part, he's not wrong on this issue, and we gotta be fair and we gotta be factual.
Instead of meeting with us and working out a compromise that brings us within sight and sound of the DNC, the city has tried to shut us away in a corner.
Now, look, I'm going to say right off the top that this whole idea that you need to meet with the Democratic Party in the city of Chicago and work out a compromise about where you can be or how long you could be there is a little bit absurd and honestly too conciliatory on behalf of the protesters for this particular event. A protest is meant to be a peaceful redress of grievances against the government. So the idea that you would get permission from the government, even in this way where you work out a deal, to me is too accepting of government overreach. But as you could see, the city of Chicago completely went for broke in this particular instance.
The groups want to hold their demonstrations close to the United Center where the convention will be held, but have instead been told they are restricted to the stretch of Columbus Drive from Roosevelt to Jackson. That location is more than 3.5 miles away.
They put them 3 miles away on this one little strip that you're not even going to intersect with if you're going to the DNC. Just look at how I-90 is marked off right here. And you know they did that so that Joe Biden wouldn't have the appearance of protesters against him during this particular event, during his nomination for his second term, because disunity in a Democratic left-wing city is not the message that he's trying to send. Now, I will say there is a record and a history of the city of Chicago doing this, and you're going to learn a little bit more about this and why I think ultimately the courts will shut this down, because it's clearly and obviously unconstitutional.
Let us not fool ourselves. We are here today because the city of Chicago is working with the Democratic National Committee to avoid the image of protesters delivering political messages to the President of the United States.
Now, look, obviously you guys could tell that I am probably in huge disagreement with these people on a whole host of issues. I mean, you just look over this person's shoulder and you see somebody wearing one of those $12 pro-Hamastinian scarves that you buy from Amazon.com that is the latest in a long long line of costumes that woke Democratic protesters end up wearing to their particular protests, very similar to the Kente cloth during the Black Lives Matter riots, very similar to the pussy hat during the Women's March. All these people want to designate who they are and what they believe by the costumes that they wear, and these are the aspects of these left-wing protesters that I personally can't stand. That being said, whether this was the Democratic convention or the Republican convention, the idea that you're going to force these people to be 3 miles away, completely unseen, completely unheard, using the power of government is fundamentally anti-American. I'm 100% against it, and I don't like what these people do. I don't like what these people stand for, but in this regard, they are doing good work in that they're fighting for free speech rights that should be preserved for everyone. I mean, this is very similar to when left-wing college campuses will try to designate free speech zones that are out of the way of any kind of traffic and say that you can only say conservative political opinions in these particular boxes, otherwise you're going to get punished for it. And the organizations like FIRE fight against that. I support them in that fight against that, so I'm going to have to support these people here, even though, again, they're protesting for a bunch of stuff that I definitely disagree with. In fact, of all the reasons that you might not want to have Joe Biden as president, these people probably seek out and find the dumbest reasons.
You have a right to free speech.
Law professor Richard Kling, who took part in demonstrations during the 1968 convention, says the First Amendment does not guarantee people proximity to any location for their demonstrations.
I appreciate the fact they would like to make it much closer to the convention, but there's all sorts of problems with respect to security and safety of the people in the convention and the rest of the community to continue to work.
Now, to be clear, there have been cases won time and time again to block off these free speech zones around the convention and in the city of Chicago. But of course, the local news decides to drag out some professor who says, you have no guarantee of proximity under the First Amendment, so yes, they could draw you a line and force you over there, and I believe that just based on my experience, and don't forget my progressive bona fides, because I was involved in the 1968 DNC, which turned into a riot, so therefore I have some authority. But to be clear, yes, there are reasonable security restrictions that you could have. 3 miles is not reasonable. That is absurd in every possible way, and I expect this to be struck down. The idea that this is covered under the First Amendment, you being able to lock people away in these free speech zones, makes no sense at all, not connected to reality, and this professor should be ashamed of himself for asserting that, but I'm sure this is something that he would like on his college campus.
Mayor Brandon Johnson responded to protesters who are suing the city of Chicago because officials deny their request to hold a protest march during the Democratic National Convention this August.
Now, of course, I want to pivot to Mayor Brandon Johnson, the mayor in the city of Chicago, who has already shown that special rules and special privileges apply to the Democratic Party, to the DNC, that don't apply to average everyday citizens. Now, we actually did a video on this channel where we talked about Brandon Johnson phasing out ShotSpotter, which is a thing that detects gunshots in various neighborhoods, and he said he wanted to get rid of it because ShotSpotter, which picks up gunshots and allows them to send police and ambulances to areas when people don't call 911, because people in the city of Chicago don't call 911 as often as you would like, is evil, white, and racist because it happens to detect gunshots in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, and the reason that's racist is because there are more gunshots in those Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, and Brandon Johnson doesn't like reality. Well, he's getting rid of that. He declared that to be evil, white, and racist, but guess what? He's only going to get rid of that, even though the contract expired months ago, after the DNC, after the Democratic National Convention, because if anybody important ends up getting shot and nobody in Chicago ends up calling 911, that would be a problem. But you average everyday citizens of Chicago, if you get shot and nobody calls it in, people say, oh, well, that's just the normal background noise of this particular neighborhood, and you die bleeding out on the street because no ambulance was sent. That's something you have to deal with. So Brandon Johnson already, in terms of the DNC, huge problem. But let's see if he saves it with the explanation right here.
My vision for the DNC ultimately is to have a safe, energetic, vibrant convention, and I'm confident that we will be able to deliver that. You know, as far as applications are concerned, there are parameters in which we are working with that individuals who wish to demonstrate we're asking those individuals work within those parameters.
So I just want to point out that Brandon Johnson was a supporter of defunding the police, abolishing the police, the Black Lives Matter riots, the looting, all that. He would excuse it, but all of a sudden, when it's the DNC, when it's protesting against Democrats, when it's not destroying private businesses, but maybe threatening the image of President Joe Biden, there are parameters that you need to stick to. There are limitations to your right to protest, not found in the First Amendment, but they are found in Brandon Johnson's mind, and he will enforce that against you because honestly, he wants a vibrant, energetic convention. And the fact is, people aren't going to be energetic over Joe Biden. So what we need is to not have anybody trying to disparage him so we could give you the illusion of energy for Joe Biden. That's what Brandon Johnson is all about right here. And yes, he's clearly and obviously coordinating with the DNC in order to crack down on the rights of his citizens, but this should be unsurprising because this is what left-wing progressives always do. They are against your individual freedoms. They will only utilize them when they're politically expedient, a la the Black Lives Matter riots, where they say, oh, mostly peaceful protests, ignore all the crazy crimes going on in our city.
The mayor went on to emphasize he supports organizations' First Amendment rights to protest. He pointed out his past as an organizer of demonstrations and says he wants to make sure protests are held safely and securely while the DNC is underway.
So the local media is like, Brandon Johnson did say, though, he did pay lip service to the idea that he supports organizations' First Amendment liberties, and he just wants to point out for everybody who must have forgotten that he was actually a community organizer. So he's actually organized protests in the past, so he has the credibility when he cracks down on your individual rights, effectively bans your protests, because he says that he supports these positive things. This is like a deadbeat dad saying that he supports a traditional household with the father in the house. But you skip town. Like, your actions defy your words, so you can hold these positions, but in reality, in actuality, we see who you are when push comes to shove. So yeah, Brandon Johnson, absolute scum, ban these protests, and then he has to be indignant about it. He has to pretend like he's above it all, so he decides to shade people who are concerned about this by saying that their concerns are illegitimate, and Brandon Johnson should be allowed to ban whatever protests that he wants.
And he says he wants people who have no interest in the convention can go on about their lives.
Yeah, so this is the constant attitude that we get from Brandon Johnson. He violates your rights, he proposes a stupid policy, he suggests something ridiculous and absurd, and then when people call him out on it, he either calls you racist or say, you know what, go on with your lives. You got nothing to do with this. Why are you so concerned about this? Individual liberty should not be something that impacts your brain. I'm absolutely tired of this guy, and I can't wait for him to lose in federal court so I can make that video about that, because what he's doing is clearly unconstitutional, and it is done to protect the image of President Joe Biden. Now, of course, those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like this video, then show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias. This has been me talking about the city of Chicago banning protests of Joe Biden. Till next time.